we looked at the research quality, and we talked about validity in the last episode, which is EPI 9A. And now in EPI 9B, we're going to talk about reliability and all the other elements that we haven't covered in the previous episode. And that reliability is also important in the quality, research quality, because reliability is measured by the extent to which researchers could come up with similar results and conclusions when investigating same questions, also known as reproducibility or replicability. And of course, to increase reliability, data collection methods and analysis methods and theoretical standpoint should be transparent, allowing the researchers to replicate, audit, or test the results of the actual of the study. So that's very important to see the results of the studies that are tested. There's about the generalization or generalizability, which is to make claims about the larger population using a limited corpus of texts or group of people, which are selected through a particular sampling method and with a specific size of the sample itself. So you are trying to draw generalizations on the from the sample you have. Of course, if the results of a student satisfaction survey concluded that most students are unhappy about a particular teaching approach, a researcher cannot assume generalization by claiming that all translation students are unsatisfied by that teaching approach without considering the validity of such assumption. So you need to actually look at the validity of the assumption. So it doesn't mean if you are being assessed in a survey when you are teaching in a course and the students believe that that there is a problem of they have their opinion or concluded that they are unhappy about the teaching approach, that does not mean that in any case that teaching approach is not valid. You need to look at and consider what's the validity of their assumption in order to prove that they are right or not. We'll move on to the next about generalizability, which is how to achieve it. How can a small-scale qualitative research contribute to the general knowledge? Because you take it from a specific to general. First, causal mechanism or mechanisms and causal, actually not casual, sorry, causal mechanisms and causal effects used to explore questions of how and why by looking at several examples or instances of a particular phenomenon. Let's say, for example, SUVs, the cars, are safer than sedans, and giving the reasons and the causes of such effects. So why are they better? You give the reasons for these kind of, that's why they are safe. That will be, or giving a detailed, rich perspective that shows how a correlation between SUVs and safety takes place. So you are correlating between safety and SUVs. Secondly, you can have what's called naturalistic generalization, which results from recognizing similarities of objects or issues in or out of context. And they are called naturalistic because they develop naturally from an experience that results really with predictions which lead to expectations. And this type of generalization formulates hypotheses that may be useful in investigating similar situation. And of course, here's an example. In a qualitative research, the complex nature of the data and the lack of repeated patterns leads to suggesting new theories and hypotheses where findings suggest new lessons for those working in similar context. A third generalization is analytical generalization, which is used to test the validity of a recent study or test the limits of established studies. In other words, using a previously developed theory to compare the empirical results of a case study. Testing if the psychological model developed by Bourdieu can be applied to the field of drama translation, for example. So you're looking at drama translation and psychological model, and you are trying to apply it in order to draw conclusions. Of course, there are qualitative methods which require credibility and warrantability. Warrantable and credible. Qualitative researchers, which they don't rely on numericals and statistics, and these ones reconceptualized the concept of validity, and they came up with credibility and warrantability. Credibility means how to achieve data credibility in qualitative research. And this is how, according to Lader, 1986, he says triangulation of methods, which is methods, data sources, and theories. 3 types: methods, data sources, and theories. Or face validity, which is refining the results based on the community reactions. Or it can be catalytic validity, which is causing to influence and change the researched by acknowledging their impact in order to increase self-understanding. Silverman in 2016 is not convinced that triangulation, since it can include or increase rigor or maybe inaccessible, and face validity, or what he can call respondent validity, since participants may not be able or may not be available or interested in validating these results. They're not interested to see if the results are true or not, and they're not available even, may not be available to do that, because of about the face validity, to see if that's true or not. So it's a problem. Therefore, Silverman came up with different methods for the validity of qualitative research, and that is by comparative case, which is finding other cases to test provisional hypotheses, confirming or falsifying them. There's deviant case analysis, of course, which is addressing deviant cases, or comprehensive data treatment, where data are incorporated and examined, and it's not is. And then finally, using tabulation and tabulations, which means that you are using counting techniques in qualitative research, since it does not have to be synonymous in numeracy. And I think I'm going to fix these 2 errors here, because data are, not is. And of course, using tabulation is here, it's correct, because we're talking about the using and not about tabulation here. So we have comparative case, deviant case analysis, or comprehensive data treatment, where data are incorporated and examined. And finally, using tabulations, which is using counting techniques in a qualitative research, since it does not have to be synonymous with numeracy. The 2 ideas which both Lader and Silverman agree on are importance of falsifying or falsifiability, and that's to be falsifiable means that the theory or the hypothesis can be demonstrated as false. For example, all swans are white. This statement is falsifiable if just one is black. In qualitative research, we can falsify or should falsify or refute our theories and hypotheses and not just verify them. So you can either verify or falsifiable. The importance of self-reflexivity, reflexivity self-reflexivity by using a research diary, for example, or a log, such as having to take a team discussion, which may be a little problematic for translation studies where research teams are not so common. There aren't many teams who are doing a translation of a book, for example, as a team. So you can ask them as a team to find out. They self-reflect on what they are doing, what they have done as a team. If they've translated a book and each one of them is translated one chapter in the book, for example. And finally, warrantable. What is warrantable? And how do you achieve that? It's by documentation and by being orderly. Of course, you can work on it and achieve it by accountability, examining and assessing and processing all the data or looking at the processes of all the data and assessing them by external auditors. So somebody else is examining and assessing, not yourself. So that makes it more warrantable. Also, you can demonstrate it, having evidence and illustrations, or look at the patterns and see if they are fulfilling certain functions, or maybe you can see if it's coherent, consisting of alternatives, discussing alternatives, or counter claims as well. Plausibility, looking at the claims that make sense in relation to other knowledge. And finally, fruitfulness, if it's fruitful, having the implications for future work. So what is warrantable? It's a way of evaluating research quality and is co-constructed between the researcher, the readers, and the participants who are invited to comment on the results. So you ask the participants to comment on the results and see what they think of the results. And according to Wood and Kroger, the two scholars in 2000, an analysis is warrantable when it is both trustworthy and sound, strong. And that is the end of my session today for credibility and warrantability. And I have looked at credibility earlier and seen how warrantability as well. We looked at reliability to start with, and we said in reliability that you have to have a study where you are actually being, the study is reliable, depending on, of course, the nature of the research, the goal of the research, and also examining the operational of the research and meeting the standards of the research. And this is something that I didn't cover in actual fact. But in any case, reliability here, it's actually we're looking at reliability. We looked at also the other elements of that are relating to that reliability to see similar results and conclusion and see if the standpoint is actually transparent. And then we looked at also generalizability, and in generalizability we looked at the claims about a general population based on just a limited corpus that you have got of texts. So you're generalizing from just a small portion of texts, you are making a generalization about them, or about a group perhaps you've selected through sampling and a specific size of the sample. So you can look at that as well in terms of generalizability. And generalizability, like for example the student satisfaction survey, as I said earlier, where they might say a particular teaching approach is they're unhappy about, but that's not, you cannot generalize on that because you have to consider the validity of that assumption by the students in the first place in order to decide on that. And then how generalizability can be achieved by how can you have a small scale qualitative research contributing to the generalization. And of course the causal mechanisms and the causal effects which I mentioned earlier about how and why you're looking at the examples of a specific phenomenon, as in the SUV are being safer than Sudan, for example. You're looking at the reasons and the causes of such effect, or you're looking at the details of it. What's the correlation between SUV, for example, and the safety that's taking place here? Is there a correlation? Are they linked together? And how come they are linked? In what way? naturalistic generalization. Of course, you're naturalizing the actual, because they are developing naturally from an experience that results with predictions that lead to expectations here, of course. And there is also the analytical generalization, which is testing the validity and look at a particularly or previously developed theory. Like, for example, you take the psychological model, for example, and you apply it to the field of translation studies or drama translation, for example. And of course, in the qualitative methods, there are two things in the qualitative methods, which is the credibility and warrantability. Warrantability and credibility are important in that one. And of course, the qualitative researchers reconceptualize the concept of validity and comes up with credibility and warrantability under validity. And in credibility, how to achieve data credibility in qualitative research. According to Lader, of course, as I said, triangulation of methods and data sources and theories. And there's also phase validity, where you ask for the community for their reaction to the results that you have come up with, or the catalyst or catalytic validity, which is seeking to influence and change the research by acknowledging the impacts on the influenced in order to increase self-understanding of the results and the influence there. And of course, we've seen how Silverman looks at the validity in a comparative. You can use a comparative study where you can compare and test what you have come up with to confirm or even falsify, as I said before. Or you can use deviant case study, where you find some deviant cases, special, unusual cases to compare with, or comprehensive data treatment, where you are examining it, or using tabulation and counting, that is using counting techniques in qualitative research, since it does not have synonyms in numeracy. Of course, the importance of falsifiability is just as important as validity. As I gave you the example about all swans are white. What if one of them is black? Then you have this statement, all swans are white, is falsifiable. Okay, so you don't need also to validate. You can falsify and a theory or refute a theory or hypotheses. And there's also the self-reflection or reflexivity, and this one is when you're looking at a group discussion, and when you have a group of students or group of translators who are translating a book, chapters, and after they've finished, you are trying to get the data from them or a log of diary of what they have done and how they did the whole book together in one group. So you are looking at that, and that is quite very uncommon to find this kind of a situation where you have a team who are actually doing this study of this team study. Of course, how to achieve warrantability is you have to be orderly, you have to document everything, and you have to be accountable, examining and assessing the data, maybe all the processes by an external auditor, not yourself, so that you become more accountable by examining and processing and assessing the processes, not yourself, or demonstrating using evidence and illustrations or patterns, perhaps, patterning, which is fulfilling certain functions, coherence, perhaps, finding alternatives or counter claims, plausibility, perhaps, making sense in relation to other knowledges, or fruitfulness, or which is the implications for future work. Warrantability is a way of evaluating the research quality, and it is co-constructed between the researcher, on the one hand, the readers, the participants, who are invited also to comment on the results of that one, of course, and the warrantability, of course, the analysis will be warrantable when it is trustworthy. Your analysis will be warrantable when it is trustworthy and sound as well. And that is when you are doing that, and that will be concluding my session for today about warrantability, and that it is trustworthy and sound if the analysis that is being the case.